All right, I am sitting literally inches from my dear friend, Dr. Emily Park.
Hello.
We are enjoying a nice hot tea because it's Arizona and it's 103 degrees out, and that's what we do.
Why not?
That's
Love
what we
green
do.
tea.
Hi.
Hello.
We are recording this episode together and we are doing some videos. So we are having fun here today. But today we are going to talk all about autoimmune disease, and we are going to answer some of what I've found to be women's most pressing questions that they just need to get some straight talk, some straight answers with. So Dr. Park's going to, I did a little intro for her, but she's going to kind of say hi and tell us a little bit about what she does because she practices functional medicine, and just give us a little intro about what she does and how that kind of autoimmune disease plays into her practice.
Yeah, awesome. So I'm Dr. Emily Park, and I'm the owner and founder of Arizona Wellness Medicine, which is a functional medicine practice here in Arizona. And I actually came from complete traditional training, and so I did medical school, internship, residency, all on the traditional side. Then got trained and certified in functional medicine. And functional medicine is all about finding and treating the root causes of whatever signs and symptoms are going on. It's getting to the bottom of it. It's really the deep detective work, finding out the why, or more commonly whys, plural, meaning figuring out all of the root causes that triggered your symptom or disease process to come on in the first place. And in the case of autoimmune disease, that's especially true and really, really crucial, because if you never figure out what the triggers are, you'll never truly heal. You may, be prescribed a traditional medication, or, even supplements and things like that. They can just be Band-Aids until you really figure out what all your root causes are and reverse those. That's your best hope of treatment with an autoimmune disease. And functional medicine is great for autoimmune diseases. So besides the advanced laboratory testing, there's also, obviously big roots in lifestyle. So we get really specific with nutrition, sleep, exercise and movement, stress management, and toxin reduction. Those are the foundations to health, right? So Talia, like if we don't have those in a good place, we can't expect our health to be in a good place, but they're especially important for, someone with an autoimmune disease.
And I think this is really helpful because a lot of women, by the time they come to me, they've maybe been diagnosed with an autoimmune disease. Maybe they haven't. Maybe they have some thyroid issues. Nobody's told them that they've got an autoimmune component, but maybe they've looked into it and think, maybe I do have this. Or they know they have an autoimmune disease, but they go to their doctor and their doctor just says, well, you've got this disease and there's just not much we can do about it, or you've got to take this prescription drug for the rest of your life. And women come to me a lot and they get frustrated because they ask their provider, is there anything that I can do to make a difference? And a lot of times they're met with resistance. And again, I always kind of put this out there that it's not necessarily that their provider is being malicious or has bad intentions or anything like that. They just may not know themselves. And so women have this intuition that I always encourage you to, and I'm speaking in this case about women because that's my audience, but have this intuition that there's something deeper going on that they do have control over and that they can make a difference. And we're going to kind of dive in that today. So I'm really, really excited. I think we should kind of get to the nitty gritty and talk about just basic stuff, because we throw around this term autoimmune disease, but I think sometimes people don't really have a grasp of exactly what an autoimmune disease is. So tell me a little bit about what your definition of an autoimmune disease is.
Yeah, so generally an autoimmune disease means that your own body's immune system, to be super specific, is attacking a part of your body. And depending on which autoimmune disease you have will depend on what part is being attacked. So I'll give you some examples that a lot of people will know about. So celiac disease, right, is a perfect example. So celiac disease is an autoimmune disease of the small intestines that's triggered by eating gluten. Now, you do have to have a genetic predisposition in order for it to get turned on, which I know we're going to get into in a minute. So that is an autoimmune disease, meaning that the small intestines are being attacked by the body. And so the small intestines are kind of being destroyed. And specifically the microvilli, the little fingers that are in the small intestine, look like this normally. But when you eat gluten and you have the celiac gene, and what happens is it gets really, really swollen. And so then all the little villi kind of close up, and then the surface area for absorption of food nutrients and whatnot gets, significantly decreased. So in the case of celiac disease, it's your, body attacking the small intestine. So then there's, of course, one of the other ones that's really common in women, especially, is Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And that is obviously an autoimmune disease of the thyroid. Again, there are autoantibodies, meaning your body's own immune system is creating an attack against the thyroid gland itself. And there's two antibodies, that we can check for. There's, thyroglobulin antibodies and thyroperoxidase antibodies. So basically, those are kind of a couple of really common examples. There's many more autoimmune diseases, which we can talk about. But it's, the body is attacking a specific part of either a gland, an organ, or a specific type of cell. Like in the case of multiple sclerosis, it's not really an organ per se that's being attacked. It's what happens is the myelin sheaths, the smooth coatings that go over the nerves that line like the nerve cells, actually get destroyed. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an organ per se, but something in the body, a cell, a nerve, an organ system is being destroyed or eaten really by your own body.
Right. And I think that's important for people to understand, is that, we get really frustrated with autoimmune conditions, but these are the same mechanisms, or the way that your body works to actually protect you against so many things. I mean, we're assaulted every day by invaders, and we don't even know it because we are so good at defending them. And it's just where this kind of journey goes a little awry, and so there's a little confusion there, and it starts attacking these parts of our body too. So
yep.
And we talk about, I've even done episodes on like anti-sperm antibodies and all these different things, so it can affect any part of the body. So that brings us, we kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier, but what causes autoimmune diseases? This is a very common question. Like, what caused this to happen? Why did I develop Hashimoto's thyroiditis? Why do I have lupus?
Right, exactly. So, of course, there's a couple of key components here, and one is you have to have the genetic predisposition. Now, for some autoimmune diseases, there's an actual gene. Like I mentioned earlier, there's a celiac gene. That's HLA-DQ8, HLA-DQ2. There's a specific gene that we know of, but there's not a specific gene for every single autoimmune disease. Like for Hashimoto's thyroiditis, there's not a specific gene. Does it run in families? Yes, it does. So there's a genetic predisposition, but there's not a specific gene we can do in a blood test, let's say, and say, oh, you have this gene, watch out, you might get Hashimoto's, right? So you have to have a genetic predisposition. Then you have to have a trigger, or triggers more commonly, meaning multiple things that turn on the autoimmune disease. And one of the key things that we know about autoimmune diseases is that most of the time the trigger actually has to do with, or lies within, the gut, right? Because about 80% of the immune system is located inside the gut. So these are where, disturbances in the microbiome, so not having enough good gut bacteria, or, having a chronic infection that you don't know about that's going on inside the gut, outside of the gut as well. But, or you don't have enough nutrients to supply this lining of the small intestine. So what happens is you end up with this, kind of chronic inflammation for some reason, and we can talk more about the reasons in a minute. But what happens is the lining of the intestines gets, inflamed, and then what happens is it gets leaky. So instead of the cells lining up, like locking into place, lining up and not letting anything through, what happens is the junctions, they're called tight junctions in the small intestine, the cells kind of start to loosen up a little bit. So what that means is that things that normally don't seep through the intestinal lining into the bloodstream are getting into the bloodstream. And so what happens, our immune system, just like Talia said earlier, like it's set up to help us defend against invaders, right? So when we get exposed to, an infection, our immune system kind of, pumps up and fights it and creates antibodies against it. But what happens when, let's say when you're, eating, gluten or soy or eggs or, anything that, your body's immune system's not used to seeing. Now all of a sudden a protein comes through that your immune system's not used to, dealing with, and it goes, ooh, that's a foreign invader, and it will kind of create an immune system response. And that's how food sensitivities happen, But that phenomenon can also happen with other chronic infections that are located or stem inside the gut as well. So you have to have the genetic predisposition, and then there has to be one or more commonly more than just one trigger, but things going on inside the gut, chronic infections, or overgrowths or undergrowths are really, really common. Food sensitivities are really common too. Toxins, right? And so that we didn't even talk about that yet. That's like a whole ball of wax. But yeah, so heavy metals, environmental toxins, mold toxins, and then are there nutrient deficiencies? Because the nutrient deficiencies, like I was mentioning, not only supply things for the lining of the gut, but for your whole entire body. And a great example of that is vitamin D, right? So vitamin D is crucial for the immune system, and there's very well published studies on low vitamin D contributing to autoimmune disease. There's great studies for years on MS with this phenomenon specifically. So there's multiple contributing factors that can lead to an autoimmune disease getting turned on, and stresses. Like, let's not forget about stresses. We can't.
Of course, stress always comes in there somewhere.
It does. And so you can't ignore it too. And that's why, in a good functional medicine visit, every single one of my visits, we review what's going on with stress in life and what are you doing for stress management. And that's why I ask for a daily relaxation practice, because I have seen stress by itself with no other factors changing, trigger an autoimmune flare. So,
right. And,
really
I always talk about too, how stress can be lots of different stress. So you can have emotional stress, you can have physical stress. So you could have the stress of, pregnancy, along with other shifts that happen with pregnancy. Yep. And that can kind of trigger things too. So I think that things to remember are that, and we kind of talk about this subject of epigenetics, or the fact that we have these genes, and that, but they're just kind of sitting there, right? They're like a blueprint, but somebody has to interpret them. And so they can be turned on, they can be turned off. So you've got this blueprint, but it doesn't mean you have a house that's built, right? So with the genes, we've got this genetic predisposition, but there's usually something that needs to come on and tell the body, okay, we need to turn these things on or turn them off. And that can be that genetic trigger. Then we've got the leaky gut, where we no longer have, because we are kind of assaulted from the outside through our skin or through our nose or that kind of thing. And then we have our mouth, from our mouth to our tushy. That's how we can be exposed to a bunch of other things too. So if that is not a nice, tightly sealed system, we have leakiness, we have inflammation, then that allows things to come into the body we're not normally used to. And then we put on top of that other triggers like toxins, infections, nutrient deficiencies, stress, all those different things. So you really have to have these it's like a perfect storm.
Yep, absolutely.
And so sometimes you may not know. I mean, you may be able to identify, okay, well, you had Epstein-Barr virus or something like that. You had some sort of identifiable thing, but it was probably a bunch of things working in concert that put us at risk.
Yes.
So that's kind of what we talked about. You touched on this before. If a family member had an autoimmune disease, does that mean I'm at increased risk for an autoimmune disease? Can we inherit them? Can you talk a bit more just about that?
Yeah. So some autoimmune diseases we know are very much inherited. Like, the example of celiac disease, right? There's, two main celiac genes that we know of, HLA-DQ8 and HLA-DQ2. So those are, you can, test for those in blood work very easily. So if you have a family member that was diagnosed with celiac disease, you can get yourself and your other family members tested. So then you would know you have the gene. So having the gene and having the disease, two different things. Like Talia said, we're talking about epigenetics. So just because you have the gene doesn't mean you're necessarily going to get the disease. But how I look at it in functional medicine, I know you practice the same way, Talia, is if you have a gene, a predisposition for the disease, aren't you going to try to do everything you can to prevent that from flipping on? So in the case of celiac, it would be like, okay, I know I have a celiac gene. I feel fine right now. I don't have any stomach symptoms. I don't have any diarrhea. Like, I feel fine. Cool. Probably want to avoid gluten on a regular basis, because you don't know when you might get hit with an infection or with a big stress, or, a million other things could be the last straw that breaks the camel's back that does turn on the autoimmune disease, right?
Right.
But then, okay, so that's one example of an autoimmune disease that has a very clear, gene. There are some other genetics involved with lots of other autoimmune diseases, but there are a good number of them that we don't we don't know all the genes, or we don't have even any genes. Like MS, there's not, to date, there's not a multiple sclerosis gene, right? But there are, for example, for some things like, ulcerative colitis, like there are some genes that can, predispose you to it, right? That you might want to check for if you have it in your family. So if you have a family member with an autoimmune disease, you want to maybe bring that up with your doctor. Even your traditional, primary care doctor should be able to run, genetic testing for you for whatever disease that runs in your family. So that way you would know as the patient if if you even carry the gene or not. And I always say knowledge is power, because some people look at it the opposite. They're like, well, I don't want to know if I'm going to get this disease. And I'm like, well, I look at it like, cool opportunity to not get the disease.
It's like if somebody said, okay, in 3 years and 2 days, your appendix is going to rupture. Right. And so you're like, okay, I'm on top of this. Like, I know this, right? Like, I mean, I agree with you. I mean, a lot of times people get down. I think they see like, oh my gosh, I'm doomed. I'm going to have X, Y, Z. But I think it all comes down to, though, if you're educated about what you can do to put yourself in the best place possible to keep that. So same thing with Hashimoto's. I mean, if your sister has Hashimoto's thyroiditis, or if your mother had it or has it, I mean, you could easily, that is something that could possibly happen for you. But there's so much you can do and so much power you have to decrease the likelihood of that happening.
Yes. And there's also, there's, testing for the genes, but then there's also, doing blood tests for the antibodies, because there's some data out there that kind of says that in many cases, you'll start to see, and I see it all the time in my practice, where because I test for these things more than your traditional doctor would test for them, that you'll start to see antibodies in the blood before you really get significant symptoms or any symptoms of the disease. And I see it a lot. Hashimoto's is a great example. So someone can have completely normal thyroid function.
And this can happen for
years, 5 years, 10 years even, they're thinking. So if I have caught several patients like this in the practice, when I see it, I'm like, ooh, hey, your thyroid function is great right now. Perfect. TSH, free T3, free T4, reverse T3, everything's looking great. But you have these thyroid antibodies. They're at low levels, but let's figure out what the triggers were, and let's see if we can't reverse those thyroid antibodies. Because if you check regularly, you'll find more. You're likely to find more autoimmune disease and be able to prevent it in someone that maybe doesn't have those exact symptoms. They usually have something. There's a reason why you're testing, right? There's a reason why people are coming to see us. You know what I mean? Like
so you could be even slightly symptomatic, but have normal function of whatever that gland is.
Right.
So in this case, the thyroid gland, I mean, it's such a common one. I think it's a good one to use as an example. But you could maybe be a bit symptomatic, maybe with fatigue, things like that. And that's because your thyroid is getting attacked. So it's got these antibodies that the body is producing against the thyroid, but it's able to keep up.
Yes.
Okay, so it hasn't done enough damage that it's really compromised how well that part of the body can keep up. And it's going to do its best for a while.
Right.
This is the issue with just checking just a TSH or TSH and T4.
Yes.
And so that's why I tell everybody, like, there's no option. You have to check the thyroid antibodies. So you've got to keep an eye on those.
Yes.
And so I agree with you. I think so. I like this because sometimes people, like I said, they feel either doomed because they have other family members, or they feel like they're kind of backed into a corner, like, well, there's nothing I can do about it, but there is, if you find the right people to work with.
Yeah. And that's a good point. Like a lot of the traditional, and again, like you said, it's not, and again, both Talia and I were traditionally trained, by the way. So we
now
get
rogue,
this,
but traditionally trained.
And, so we get these issues very well. And I have to tell people all the time, don't get upset or mad at your doctor. I didn't know this stuff before, and you didn't know this stuff before. We sought out, extra training and education in integrative and functional medicine. And so the traditional doctors will say, oh, check your TSH with a reflex T4. If everything's fine, you're fine. Or if you go to, even if you, take it to the next degree, let's say, you have, let's use Hashimoto's again, you go to the traditional endocrinologist and, until your thyroid function actually starts to fail, they're going to say, we don't have anything for you. And in our world, it's like, well, hold on, let's figure out what all the triggers are. How did this autoimmune disease get turned on? Let's see if we can either turn it off, meaning either reverse it, or at least get the antibodies down as low as possible.
And I think that's a great point, is that if you can identify an autoimmune disease in the early stages, your chances of reversing it and or at least keeping it really well controlled are much better.
Yes.
Because after a certain amount of damage has been done,
correct,
there's a point where you can't reverse it. Okay.
Yes.
So the tissue damage can be, and I'm not saying that to be down, but that's what's so empowering about this and about teaching people. And so even if you're a mom and you have a daughter or something like that, but now you know better, right? So we know better, we do better.
Yep.
But that's where the power is. It's in that kind of silent early phases.
Exactly. So to use another example of an autoimmune disease, so, let's talk about rheumatoid arthritis, right? Mm-hmm. So if someone comes to me and they've had 20 years of rheumatoid arthritis and they've got, joint deformities, can we undo those joint deformities? Not really, because as Talia mentioned, the destruction has already been done. The damage has already been done. But in that same person, it doesn't mean we have nothing for you. Right. Can we get you feeling better?
Absolutely.
Yes. And can we maybe stop the disease progression? Exactly. But, it's the same thing with the thyroid. Like you can't grow a new thyroid gland
at this point
yet, right?
Bionic thyroid.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So if your Hashimoto's has been going on so long that you've destroyed most of your thyroid gland, yes, you are going to need thyroid medication. There's nothing we can do to replace the gland. But again, getting the antibodies to come down will surely make you feel better, because the circulating antibodies of any kind, and this is true of any autoimmune disease. So everyone thinks of rheumatoid arthritis is just the joints, and, Crohn's and ulcerative colitis is, just in the GI tract. Well, and Hashimoto's is just the thyroid. But the circulating antibodies create symptoms literally from head to toe for all of those diseases. Yeah.
And that's why you could potentially have joint pain just from having Hashimoto's or something like that.
Exactly. About 20% of Hashimoto's patients have musculoskeletal complaints. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And that's why it all makes sense. And that's one, just as a side note, because I'm thinking about this. That's why when I work with people, I say, tell me anything that's going on that you could think of, even if your left pinky toe hurts. Because even if you think that it doesn't make a difference or it's not related, it may make a difference. It may jump out to me, and we might even find a reason for it, right? Your left pinky toe hurts because you've got these antibodies depositing in the joint. Who knows, right?
Right.
So another question I get asked a lot is, why does it seem like you get one autoimmune disease and then there's other ones, or people often use this term like they run in packs.
Yes.
So is this true, and why does it happen?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. So there is some truth to that. Does it mean that everybody with one autoimmune disease is eventually going to get 3 or 4 of them? No. But there is a phenomenon where because if you think about it logically, some of them, like we mentioned, actually have genes. So what if you had a celiac gene, and your mom had a history, and your sister and your aunt or whatever had a history of Hashimoto? So there's kind of 2 things in there, not the same gene, right? But to Talia's point earlier, that on the epigenetics, you still have to trigger the autoimmune disease, right? And so if you've got predisposition to more than one autoimmune disease, it makes sense that the same triggers are going to flip on possibly more than one autoimmune disease, especially the longer the triggers are kind of left unmanaged, undealt with.
And that's another point, is that when you've got an autoimmune disease, your immune system is heightened anyway.
Yes.
That leads to more inflammation. It's not a question of if, it's there.
Yep.
And that could be another trigger. So it's kind of like this self-perpetuating cycle.
Yep.
I think too, that can deplete your nutrients. It can cause issues with, imbalances in hormones. And so I think that's, once that kind of perfect storm starts, and if it's not taken care of early, then that can just perpetuate that cycle. And so then you can get more than one.
Yep. Perfect.
So we talked about, I think we really kind of touched in, some of the triggers. So we talked about how it could be, you have this leaky gut, we've got inflammation, nutrient deficiencies, toxins, infections. But so I think that kind of touches on this point that I get asked a lot as well. And this is sometimes more from people who are a little bit more hesitant about, what's going on in the world. But people will say, well, why does it seem like everybody's got an autoimmune issue, or like everybody's got Hashimoto's now? It's everybody and their mom. Oh, you're tired? It's because you got Hashimoto's.
Right.
Right? Oh, okay. Yeah, well, maybe it's because you haven't slept in 24 hours. No, but that's
sleep's another big trigger, by the way.
Right.
We didn't talk about that too much, but that's a huge stress on the body, not getting enough good quality sleep. Sorry.
No, but a lot of people come to me, and, if they're more skeptical about, a unique approach to healthcare or to wellness, and they'll say, well, everybody seems like they've got thyroid issues now, which is actually true.
Yeah. Yeah. So Synthroid is historically every year in the top 4 prescriptions written in the United States. And Synthroid is the top medication that's prescribed by traditional doctors for thyroid medication. So yeah, that's true. And yeah, the autoimmune disease rates are clearly on the rise. And there's just some staggering statistics about that. So it's more and more common. So to tell you your question, like why, right? And if you think about it now, aren't we in kind of like we live in a really toxic world, and not just toxins like, chemicals and metals, things like that, but, electromagnetic frequencies, right? So we're exposed to, now we're doing a giant experiment, by the way, like a lot of the, scientists kind of say this, where it's like, we haven't really studied the effects of all these Wi-Fi signals and electromagnetic frequencies that are out there on our bodies. But, so we're exposed to that. We're exposed to chemicals and toxins on an exponential level now, right? And there's, the government especially keeps, I think, allowing in substances that have not been, really tested, or substances that have been like a new chemical spin on a substance that was tested to be toxic.
That are tested and known to be toxic, but lobby heavily in.
Exactly. Yes. So there's a whole.
Like Roundup.
Yes. Yeah. Like Roundup or glyphosate's one of them, right? And so that's why it's important to eat organic. But aside from that, even all the chemicals, so just our toxic load, and these are things you don't even know you're being exposed to through foods, through your water. Everyone thinks of chemicals as something that has to, smell really like strong,
lead,
or
manufactured,
or
like
heavy
metal
plant. Yes, yeah, or heavy metal. But a lot of these things you don't even know you're being exposed. And so I think there's an increase in our toxic load. I think that, as a society, we're really pretty sleep deprived. And that sleep gets blown off, and it seems to be some badge of honor, how busy we all are, and how, I only got 4 hours of sleep and I'm still working my 12-hour day, that kind of thing. But not getting enough good quality sleep is a huge stress on the body. So I think there's toxins. I think there's, stresses, and that's, like Talia said, mental, emotional stress, physical stress. Physical stress, by the way, can be working out too much, or it can actually be on the opposite end, sitting on your butt too much. The bookends tend to not be great. But, and then the poor nutrition state that America is in, right? We have the highest obesity rates, the highest, type 2 diabetes rates. Chronic disease is on the rise. It just is. And so if you think about all the things that keep us healthy, the foundations to health: nutrition, sleep, exercise and movement, stress management, toxin reduction, our Western society that we're living in right now, we do a bad job with all of those typically, unless, you're taking control of your health.
And I think something people don't realize is that it's almost that we can't adapt quickly enough. So our bodies can, adapt to things over time, but things are changing so rapidly. Mm-hmm. So even if you looked at what your great-grandparents ate versus and that's not that long ago,
right?
You're going to see a huge difference.
Totally.
In what they ate, how the food was prepared, how fresh it was, how it was farmed, what did they use to fertilize the soil?
Yeah.
All those different things. I mean,
yep.
And so I run across a lot of resistance on this because, for example, some people know that my daughter has a lot of food allergies, and food allergies are on the rise, like tremendously.
Oh, yeah.
For the same, like we were talking about, same kind of principles happening here. So people will ask me all the time, like, oh my gosh, just 20 years ago, nobody had a peanut allergy, or it was like the random kid that had the peanut allergy in school, and now everybody's got a peanut allergy. And some people look at that as like, oh, it's this, people are just crazy, they're super sensitive, but it's not. Like, so for my family, it's a life-threatening thing. And so it's a long conversation to get into, but I think a lot of it has to do with all these, again, it's that perfect storm of all these different things. It's impossible to say that it's just one thing or another, but when you've got these toxins, when we're killing off the good bacteria in our gut and allowing the bacteria that tends to be more detrimental to our health, because there's always kind of a balance of certain things. When we've got these toxins in our lives, and that goes down to everything from what we brush our teeth with, what lotion we put on our skin, all these different things, then we are really kind of assaulting our body with a lot of things that were never there before.
Right.
So that's my opinion too of why it seems like, and it's not just it seems like, this isn't in people's heads. If we go in and we check your blood and you've got antibodies to your thyroid, that's not in your head. That's an autoimmune issue going on there. So this is not just made up. This isn't just, the news coming, fake news.
Right. Yeah. It's data driven. Absolutely.
So I think it's easy. So if we know, again, if we've talked a lot about these triggers, right? So we could have this genetic predisposition. We could have just a predisposition. We could have an actual gene. We could have this leaky gut. We could have these triggers. That brings us, I think, to then how are we empowered? If we've got increased risk for an autoimmune disease, or if we actually have an autoimmune disease, what are some key things that you talk to your patients about as far as what they can do to decrease their risk or to manage their disease or put it into remission, so on and so forth.
Yep. So, about 80% of that is really the lifestyle factors that we've talked about. And so, I would say, nutritionally, like the biggest thing you can do for yourself is to eat real food, like eat real food, decrease processed and packaged food, decrease your sugar intake. Now, obviously you want to eat organic when you can, and, on your proteins, you want to make sure they're well sourced. If you eat beef, fine, organic grass-fed beef, if salmon, wild caught, and so on. And definitely organic produce, as I mentioned, when you can. But there's also, you also want to test to see if you've got any food triggers, right, on the nutrition thing. So that's why I actually will put people through, a 30-day reset to help you figure out what your food sensitivities are. So, and we know that a couple of triggers that are really common for autoimmune disease, gluten and dairy are just the top two triggers, but it could be other grains too. It could be soy. It could be the legume family. It could be other things that, like eggs and the nut family. There's a lot of different, potential food sensitivities.
And remember, this is not necessarily like an overt, like I eat something and my throat's swelling and all that stuff. So your only manifestation may be your autoimmune disease. Now, there's probably others that maybe you're not connecting the dots, but maybe you've got some eczema.
Yes. So this is a great point, because food allergies. So allergies are IgE. So that's the body's immediate immune system response to something. So that's like what happens to your family if they eat nuts, right? You're going to right away, you're going to go, ooh, you're going to have hives, or you're going to have your throat's going to, swell, close. Something profound is going to happen pretty shortly after you are exposed to it. But the majority of issues with foods are more like sensitivities. So the sensitivities can be delayed. And so this is where it can take anywhere. It can take up to 3 days, 3 to 4 days for the immune system to create a response after it's seen the item. And so if you eat, let's use peanuts, right? So if you eat peanut butter and you might feel fine initially, you may feel fine the next day, you may feel fine the day after that, might be on day 3 where you're like, oh, and you might get any symptom from head to toe. You could get a headache, right? You could get muscle aches, joint pains, you could have decreased energy levels, you could have nasal congestion, So that's why, it's one of the key things that I do for my patients is I help them get through a 30-day reset. And I use paleo nutrition because it does automatically take out the top triggers. And if you have an autoimmune disease, I would actually recommend doing a paleo autoimmune protocol, because it takes out extra things that are known to be immune system triggers for autoimmune disease specifically. And so you go through that process a minimum of 30 days. And 30 days is key. And there's a reason why everyone says 30 days, right? It's because it takes your body's immune system 23 days to calm down by only half. That's the half-life of the immunoglobulins.
Or the antibody.
Exactly. And so at the end
because
of
so when we make those, they're little proteins, right?
Yep.
So we make those antibodies and they stick around for a while and they do their job, and then they slowly get broken down. So the body's going to break those down. So that's what we mean by that half-life. So the body's like, okay, you know, send out the troops, and the troops go out. So you get all your antibodies, and it's like, okay, so say you're doing the elimination, or you're doing this 30 days. So right before you ate something that triggered this response, and then it's like, okay, we sent the troops out. Now we can relax. And slowly they're like, okay, we haven't seen anything in a while, right? So we haven't seen it. We don't need more troops out. And so we start slowly getting rid of the troops until they finally go. So that's just an idea of thinking about those antibodies and how your body's going to break them down and slowly then get rid of them.
Yeah, totally. No, that's awesome. Thanks for breaking that down for non-doctory people.
Sometimes we get together, we get people and it's just crazy.
Yes, no, totally. So Talia is right. So it takes your body's immune system, at least 23 days to calm down by half. Is kind of the in a nutshell. And so 30 days gets you well past the halfway point, to where at the end of at least 30 days, and for some people, it takes more than 30 days. It may be 60 days or 90 days to really get you to a point where you feel good, because everyone's immune system set up a little bit differently. But 30 days would be a minimum. And then let's say at the end of the 30 days, you want to figure out, oh, I want to find out, can I have eggs? Yeah. Do eggs cause me an issue? Is it a trigger for me? Cool. You add eggs back in the diet, 1 serving, 3 times a day, 3 days in a row. The only new thing that you're showing your body. And then you track how you feel, and you have to take a scan from head to toe, because if it's GI, if it's gut, beautiful, because we all connect that with food.
Right. You start getting bloated. You start getting diarrhea, constipation, and all that.
Something, it will happen. But it could not just be the GI tract, like we mentioned, right? It could be anything from head to toe.
And you will get more, I think people will become more in tune, because sometimes we get used to living with all these different things going on. And even when they go away, we're not as aware of it.
Yes.
But when they come back, so for example, for me, I do have a sensitivity to wheat or to gluten and non-gluten wheat. I never knew it. I did blood testing, but now that I know, if I do get something that, there's some wheat and something, I will get, like I said, like stuffiness in my nose. And it's nothing I was aware of before until I started to do this. So you really start to really develop a good communication with your body. And I think it really grows your confidence too, because you're like, you really get to know yourself, and it's like, you should be proud of that. Like, I'm listening to everything that you're talking to me about.
Because no matter what any blood test says, your body is still, I tell people all the time, your body's, and it's a giant biochemistry experiment here. I say that all the time, because there, no matter what the blood tests say, and by the way, there's not one blood test that looks at every part of the immune system's response. So your body is still the gold standard. But and so walking through, to answer your question, so that was a nutrition piece.
Right.
So nutrition, right? So that's what you would do. Getting enough good quality sleep, as we mentioned, because not getting enough good quality sleep is a huge stress on the body that can have a waterfall effect on, the gut, the adrenals, the thyroid, and the sex hormones. And so you definitely want to make sure you're getting enough good quality sleep. You want to make sure you're getting enough good quality exercise and movement in. And as I mentioned, you can go too much on that, and you can underdo it as well. So getting enough movement in. And then of course the stress management part, and that's a big ball of wax to tackle. But one of the easy ways I have my patients start is by, starting a meditation practice, even just for 5 or 10 minutes before you go to bed. Keep it simple, make it doable. You can do it any time of day. If it's first thing in the morning that works for you, great. Yes, if traditional meditation wants you to do it first thing in the morning, but I say you do it when you're actually going to do it, instead of like, oh, I didn't wake up at 5 a.m. I can't do my meditation today. You want to,
and I'm going to be doing
a
whole highlight on meditation,
because
it is so powerful. But even I feel like I struggle with meditation.
Yeah.
And I want to put that out there, because I think people And we always go to meditation because it's so profound, the effects of meditation.
Oh,
if
yeah.
done properly, the effects that it has on your health are profound. But so many of us feel like, I can't do it. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't have time for it, blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't have to be just meditation. I think like swimming sometimes is very relaxing, or just actually studies show
It's
any
a moving meditation. Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Or even
floating,
water, any being in water in any way, shape, or form actually is very relaxing to a lot of people.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, whatever it is for you to like just turn down the calmate a little bit.
Yes.
And that is I think that's going to be for most people one of the hardest things.
Yep, exactly. So, and then of course, you know, the toxin reduction part that we talked about already. And so that's where you're going to take a good look at your personal care products and your household items, and, you know, do everything you can to decrease your total toxic load. Because at the end of the day, the triggers for autoimmune disease, there's one medical term called total allostatic load. And so that's the total load of every single stress on the body, which includes all the things we talked about: chronic infections, nutrient deficiencies, you know, not moving enough, you know, doing too much exercise, not getting enough good quality sleep. All of those things will add up to toxin exposure, the big load on the body. And then if your body's overstressed, you're going to activate the sympathetic nervous system.
Right. That cup just
fight or flight.
overflows.
And yeah.
I love it. So that I have two more questions. One is then, and I think we touched on this a little bit, but can autoimmune diseases be cured? If we use that word cured.
Yes. I don't use the word cured, only because if you think about it logically, based on everything we've said so far, if you put yourself back in the exact situation that turned on the autoimmune disease, it will surely come back, right? So if you know that gluten's a trigger, and that you had, a lead exposure overload, and you had a chronic infection, and all those things, if you treated those and your autoimmune disease is reversed, meaning we can't see antibodies anymore in your blood, or the antibodies have come down. If you do those, if you ate gluten again on a regular basis, you might re-trigger that, for example. Or if you had, if you unfortunately got hit with, an infection of some kind, that could trigger your autoimmune disease. If you had a huge stress in your body or your life, that can trigger an autoimmune disease to come back. So I like to say reversed, as in it's reversible, because I'm very clear with people. If you go back to doing, if we recreate the situation that turned it on, it's going to turn it on again. So you can really not say cured.
But I like the idea of it being reversed.
Yes.
And remember, that does, not for everything can we, like I said, if there's been extensive tissue damage where the body has destroyed too many of the cells, at this point, you're not going to get those back. So again, the importance of addressing it early on and catching it early on if we can. But we can halt progression. We can manage symptoms really, really well. And in some cases, we can reverse it.
Yes,
so,
that's exactly right.
So you recently went to a functional medicine conference. I venture to say the biggest one that there is.
Yep.
And there's always, new and exciting things. So I just wanted to end with some of the like new and exciting things as far as management of autoimmune disease.
Yeah, cool.
So this is how we geek out. That's how we roll.
That's right.
We like text each other. Oh my gosh, what did you do?
Yeah, no, seriously, we both have issues. But so I've been to 4 conferences already this year. That's part of functional medicine. We have to have nose to the ground, have to stay really current. So in May of this year was the Institute for Functional Medicine's annual conference, and it was all on autoimmune disease this year. So it was awesome. It was so good. And it was great to get updates on things that, have been, some of the things that actually been around for a little while, but there was more research to support it. And, but there's always, there's some pioneer practitioners that have been doing things, on their own that know that work.
Outside the box.
Outside the box. But now there's, research, to support, hey, this actually works. It's not just this, these 10 doctors doing this. There's actual studies. So a couple things that, and there were so many things, we definitely won't have time to talk about them all, but 2 things I want to mention. One is the use of low-dose naltrexone. And we've known this for years, and I've actually been using LDN in my patients for a couple years now. And low-dose naltrexone is super supportive of the immune system. And there's really good data on autoimmune diseases, cancers, and even some other, chronic illnesses too. And it's a pretty benign medication. It is a medication. It is a prescription.
One of the very, very few medications combinations I recommend.
Yep, exactly. Yep. It needs to be compounded, especially at a pharmacy. And so naltrexone, what it is it traditionally, it's in a category of what are considered opioid antagonists. What the heck does that mean? That means it's usually used to reverse the effects of an opioid, like a morphine-like compound, right? And so in the hospital, if you had an overdose of morphine, let's say, they would, give you a medication like naltrexone. They would actually give you something else called naloxone or Narcan, but it's same family to reverse the effects of opioids. High doses of it, right? So what they've been studying over the past decade or two now is that low doses of naltrexone actually have been shown to help support the immune system. And so in some really small doses, like I will start with 0.5 milligrams, 1 milligram, and work up from there to a total of 4 milligrams a day. But I will say this, it's not like other medications where, the next week you're going to be like, oh, I feel amazing. It's kind of the slow and steady wins the race there, and it's the long game with it. But what you'll notice over time is that, there'll be symptom reduction, or, I'll see antibodies in the blood come down. So you'll see laboratory, evidence that the LDN is doing its job.
And basically what it does is it kind of tricks, I hate to use that word, but tricks the body to make its own opioids.
Yep.
And we now know that the immune cells have a ton of receptors, so they communicate with this. Those opioids or endorphins tell the body what to do, and the immune system in particular. And I'm going to do a whole episode on this because I feel like it's so underused. It's a little complex when we talk about what's happening, but it's really interesting. And so over time, your body's just naturally making more of these. And something to know is that it's actually very hard. Very few things increase these levels in your body. Very few things. Even if we inject them directly into the body, right?
Yeah, so the half-life's super fast.
They just get broken down and
degraded really quickly.
So really the body making them itself is the best way to do it. And so what you do is you temporarily kind of tell the body to make more of these. And then they go in and they tell the immune cells like, hey, whoa, you guys are getting crazy over there. Like that's our thyroid. Like, let's take it easy. Okay, they're on the same team. And people do great with it. I've used it in infertility patients. I mean, you can use it, and it was a little bit out there for a long time, and it's still like for infertility, it's still a little bit on the edge as far as the research and stuff like that. But providers are using it. So you do need a provider. You need a licensed provider to prescribe it. As she said, it's compounded, but I will tell you, it's very inexpensive.
Yeah.
Probably $30 to $40 a month. We're here in Arizona. I have a very good friend who's a compounding pharmacist, and that's what he charges. So if you're getting, charged a lot more than, think about it. But, and the side effect profile is pretty low. So that's a great one.
Yep. So LDN. And the other exciting thing that we didn't even talk about, I'm going to spring this on you, that has really exciting good data is something called the fasting mimicking diet. Do you know about FMD? Okay.
No, but I'm really interested into fasting right now, in intermittent fasting.
Yes. Okay.
So let's talk.
Yeah. So the fasting mimicking diet is exactly what it sounds like. So you're not actually fasting, but you're doing something that mimics fasting. So there is a great scientist out of USC. His name is Dr. Walter Longo, and he actually has a book out there.
Walter, we're just best friends.
Walter, you go way back.
We go way back.
Okay, perfect. He actually wrote an entire book called The Longevity Diet that's actually very accessible to the layperson. And I actually, his main laboratory assistant spoke at the Institute for Functional Medicine's annual conference, and it was a great 90-minute lecture. And after that, I was like, I got to know more. So I actually read the entire book in like 10 days.
Might have to see if we can get them on the podcast.
Yeah, totally. So the fasting mimicking diet is 100% plant-based diet, and it's for 5 days only. And so so for 5 days, and it's
I'm making this face.
Really?
Yes. For those of you who aren't seeing the video. smiley face.
Yes, and so and there's great data for autoimmune diseases, for cancer. He's also got data for, of course, obesity, type 2 diabetes, inflammation like the CRP marker. But anyway, so and this is all out again out of USC by Dr. Walter Longo, and so and what was very well studied was doing 5 days of this fasting mimicking diet. So the calories are dropped, and it's all plant based, and your protein levels are actually very low during this time. And then, so what he proved was that if you do blood markers before and you do blood markers after, significant improvement. But what was extra cool was that if you test later, like months later, there was still improvement in the blood markers. Not as big of an improvement as when you very first finished the 5 days of the FMD, but it was better than before you did it. And so,
how frequently do you do it?
Love it. We're on the same wavelength there.
Yep.
So for people that have complex chronic diseases, the recommendation is to do 1 cycle of the fasting mimicking diet. So 5 days, you do it 3 months in a row, and then you kind of do it quarterly after that. But if you're a pretty relatively healthy person, you might do it twice a year. Or if you're a really healthy person, you might go through it, like once a year. And so it's a very benign, very easy thing to do. So it's
plant-based.
Yes. So Dr. Longo actually created a specific product called Prolon. And it's Prolon. Prolon. And it's a company called L Nutra, which he created. And by the way, all of his proceeds go completely back into his research foundation called createscures.org. Another reason that's amazing. But he wanted to make the fasting mimicking diet accessible to everybody. So he created this entire basically, I call it a fancy shoebox because that's kind of what it reminds me of.
A kit.
It's very beautifully packaged, yes. But it has in there what you're eating, all of your food for the 5 days. Yeah. So there's, soups that obviously you reconstitute with hot water. There's some olives in there. There's, some nut-based bars. And, so there's some like cracker type things like kale crackers and whatnot. But anyway, so it's very specific. And so that product is what's studied in his studies specifically. And so you do that for 5 days, and it's very simple.
Do you know how much it costs?
Besides water, I think,
and I'll link to it.
I think I want to say it's around like $220 or $225 or something like that for the kit for 5 days. That's all you're eating.
You could even do this. Could be an interesting experiment because if it's pretty benign, the risks are really low, right? So people could be checking their levels prior to this, and then so they checked immediately after.
And then, of course, months later, I think like 6 months later on a lot of the studies, and they were looking at, like what happened to, blood sugar and cholesterol and CRP and IGF-1, and they were looking at those markers on and of course, other markers like, weight and waist circumference, stuff like that, they were looking at as well.
So it mimics fasting.
Yes. So it turns on, it basically, and there's really good research in cancer too. We'll get into that another day.
Yeah. I was going to say need its own episode.
Yes. Yeah. There's another.
I'm going to read the book. Here's what's going to happen. I'll read it. Yeah. And then we'll come back and we'll do a whole episode just on that.
Yeah. Let's do it.
I love it.
But so it's accessible to, it's very accessible to people. If you want to, go ahead and give the, fasting mimicking diet a try, it's pretty low risk. Will go over, if you do get the kit, they will go over like what to watch out for because, it's a huge change in the diet. So you want to make sure you don't get dehydrated, and you want to make sure blood pressure doesn't go too low.
And if you're an athlete or something like that.
Yeah. Or if you're you're going to not do your hard workouts during that time. And, if you are on blood pressure medication or on medication for blood sugar, like you definitely need to be supervised, by a physician. But yeah.
Oh, I love it. Oh, we will come back with more from that. I'm very excited. I'll link to it though. I'll link to any resources we talk about.
Perfect.
Oh, I'm so excited. So I just think I want people to recognize a couple things. Number one, recognize that what risk factors are and how we minimize those, how women in particular, because that's what I work with, can really have a lot of control. I think this is a big thing, for us. We just need, we feel like sometimes that we're just on this roller coaster and, grasping for anything. We just have no control. But there's a lot we can do with autoimmune diseases. And we need to respect them because they can be intense. Like the consequences can be very severe. But so we need to respect them, but there's so much we can do. And there's a lot on the forefront, because I think with this expanding, I think I said the other time that we talked, it's one like the 8th leading cause of death in females. I mean, so this is serious stuff. It impact everything from, fertility to everything in our lives. So I love the fact that there's so much we can do to really take the reins and take control of our health, and to know that this isn't just like, it's not a death sentence. It's not, you're not just stuck in stone, that there's a lot you can do to make some changes there. So I'm thrilled. I love it.
Awesome.
All right. Well, if you happen to live in Arizona, or perhaps you live somewhere that's cold and snowy, and you want to frequent Arizona because we're really awesome. Now, yes, it's 105 degrees today, and that's okay. The rest of the year, we are super amazing and super awesome. So if you are here, if you're visiting, if you live here, and if you want to work with, I'm not saying this just because she's next to me right now.
Okay.
But Dr. Park is a phenomenal, not only is she a just insanely intelligent woman, a phenomenal functional medicine provider, but she is literally one of the most wonderful, nicest humans I know.
Oh, thanks, Talia.
You must come here. There are, I work a lot with women, and I basically teach them what they can do without a provider. But there are times, for example, low dose naltrexone, or all these different things where you need somebody, or maybe you're making progress, but you get stuck and you need another pair of eyes on it. So it is wise to expand your team, your health and vitality team. So I will link to her website here. And not only does she see patients, but she offers her own videos and information to people. So, but if you are in the area, you may want to stop by and say hi, or schedule a little trippy trip. All right. Well, we'll be back for sure. We're going to be doing several episodes together, so I'm so excited. So thanks, Emily.
Yes.
/ Dr. Park.
You're so welcome.
Love
Talia.
ya.
Okay.
All right. Until next time.
Sounds great.